Tupelo, Mississippi. It was January 8th, 1935, 4:35 a.m. In a two-room shotgun house on Old Saltillo Road, Gladys Love Presley is in labor. But this birth will be unlike any other in the Presley family history. Gladys is carrying twins. The first baby emerges stillborn. Jesse Garon Presley never takes a breath, never opens his eyes, never makes a sound. 35 minutes later, his twin brother, Elvis Aaron Presley, enters the world, alone, screaming, and carrying a burden he will never understand, but will never escape. Dr. William Hunt, the attending physician, places the living baby in Gladys's arms, while Vernon Presley stands in the corner, staring at the small, wrapped bundle that contains their first son. Jesse Garon will be buried the next day in an unmarked grave in Priceville Cemetery. Elvis will spend his entire life unconsciously searching for the brother he never knew, but somehow always missed. This is creative storytelling based on documented psychological research and the known facts of Elvis's childhood that shaped both his extraordinary talent and his tragic vulnerabilities. Modern trauma psychology tells us that twins who survive the death of their sibling often experience what's called survivor guilt, a deep, unconscious belief that they don't deserve to live when their twin didn't. This psychological wound begins before conscious memory, but it shapes every aspect of the survivor's personality. Elvis will grow up feeling simultaneously special and unworthy. Special because he survived when Jesse didn't. Unworthy because he can never understand why he was chosen to live. This paradox will drive him to seek constant validation while never believing he deserves the love he receives. But Jesse Garon's death is only the first trauma in Elvis's childhood. The Presley family is trapped in crushing poverty that goes beyond simple financial hardship. This is the kind of poverty that attacks a child's sense of safety, security, and self-worth at the most fundamental level. Vernon Presley works sporadically, when he can find work, when he feels like working, when he's not drinking or gambling away what little money the family has. Gladys takes in laundry and sewing to keep food on the table. 8-year-old Elvis watches his mother's hands crack and bleed from washing other people's clothes in lye soap, and he develops a deep, unconscious association between love and sacrifice. The family moves constantly, 17 different homes before Elvis turns 13. Each move represents another failure, another eviction, another reminder that the Presleys don't belong anywhere. Elvis learns that home is not a place, but a feeling, and that feeling is always temporary. At school, Elvis is marked immediately as different. His clothes are patched and too small. His lunch is often just a cold biscuit or nothing at all. The other children sense his vulnerability like predators sense wounded prey. Elvis is weird. The kids whisper. Elvis is poor. Elvis talks to himself. What they don't understand is that Elvis isn't talking to himself. He's talking to Jesse. Even at age 6, 7, 8, Elvis maintains conversations with his dead twin brother. He saves half his food for Jesse. He leaves space in his bed for Jesse. He explains his day to Jesse every night before falling asleep. This isn't unusual for surviving twins, but it marks Elvis as strange in the eyes of other children. He's bullied mercilessly, not just teased, but physically attacked by boys who see his gentleness as weakness. Red West, who will later become Elvis's lifelong friend and bodyguard, first meets Elvis when he intervenes in one of these attacks. He finds 12-year-old Elvis being beaten behind the school building by 3 older boys who are calling him names and destroying his guitar. They said, "I was too pretty to be a boy." Elvis tells Red through split lips and tears. They said, "I sing like a girl." This attack teaches Elvis a devastating lesson. Being different is dangerous. Being sensitive is dangerous. Being artistic is dangerous. The very qualities that will make him famous are the qualities that make him a target. Elvis begins to develop what psychologists call hypervigilance, the constant scanning of his environment for threats. He becomes a people pleaser, desperately trying to anticipate what others want from him so he can avoid conflict. This survival mechanism will later make him an incredible performer, but it will also make him vulnerable to anyone who offers approval in exchange for compliance. Gladys Presley, dealing with her own unprocessed grief over Jesse's death and the stress of extreme poverty, begins to develop an unhealthily intense relationship with Elvis. He becomes not just her son, but her confidant, her emotional support system, and her reason for living. "Elvis, you're all I have," she tells him regularly. "You're my whole world. Promise me you'll never leave me." These words, meant as expressions of love, become psychological chains. Elvis learns that his mother's emotional well-being depends entirely on him. He becomes responsible not just for his own survival, but for hers as well. This dynamic creates what psychologists call emotional parentification, a child being forced to take care of a parent's emotional needs instead of having their own needs met. Elvis learns to read his mother's moods, to anticipate her needs, to sacrifice his own wants to keep her happy. When Gladys is sad about their poverty, Elvis promises he'll be rich someday and buy her everything she wants. When she's lonely because Vernon is gone for days at a time, Elvis sleeps in her bed and holds her while she cries. When she's worried about their future, Elvis becomes the family cheerleader, insisting that everything will work out fine. This role, as the family's emotional caretaker, robs Elvis of his childhood, but it also develops his extraordinary empathy and his ability to connect with audiences. He learns to read emotions, to respond to unspoken needs, to make people feel better through his presence and attention. But the cost is enormous. Elvis never learns to have needs of his own. He never develops a secure sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on other people's approval. He becomes addicted to the feeling of being needed, but he also becomes terrified of disappointing anyone. The family's financial situation becomes even more desperate when Vernon is arrested for check forgery in 1938. Elvis is 3 years old when his father is sentenced to 3 years in Parchman Farm, Mississippi's notorious state penitentiary. For 8 months, Elvis and Gladys are completely alone. Gladys, already fragile, becomes increasingly unstable. She talks to Elvis like he's an adult, sharing fears and worries that no 3-year-old should have to hear. "We might lose the house," she tells him. "We might have to go live in the county home. I don't know how we're going to survive without your daddy." Elvis, still a toddler, absorbs his mother's terror and makes it his own. He begins having nightmares about being abandoned, about losing his mother the way he lost Jessie. He becomes clingy, refusing to let Gladys out of his sight, crying hysterically if she tries to leave him with neighbors. When Vernon is released early for good behavior, the family is reunited, but forever changed. Vernon has been humiliated by his imprisonment and responds by becoming even more unreliable and emotionally distant. Elvis learns that men disappear, that fathers can't be trusted, that he must be the man of the family even though he's still a child. The poverty continues, but now it's accompanied by shame. Vernon's criminal record makes finding work even harder. The family becomes more isolated, more desperate, more dependent on each other in ways that aren't healthy. Elvis begins to exhibit what trauma specialists recognize as parentification trauma responses. He becomes hyper-responsible, feeling guilty about any problem the family faces. If there's no food, he blames himself for eating too much. If Gladys is sad, he blames himself for not being good enough to make her happy. At school, his behavior becomes more erratic. Teachers notice that he's either withdrawn and silent or hyperactive and attention-seeking. He has difficulty concentrating, struggles with reading, and seems to live in a fantasy world where he's rich and famous and can solve all his family's problems. But Elvis also begins to discover his escape: music. When he sings, the pain stops. When he performs, people smile at him instead of pitying him or bullying him. Music becomes his drug, his therapy, his way of transforming suffering into something beautiful. The gift of his first guitar on his 11th birthday isn't just a present, it's a lifeline. Elvis pours all his unexpressed emotions into that instrument. The loneliness of missing Jessie, the shame of being poor, the fear of losing his mother, the anger at his father's failures, the desperate need to be loved and accepted. But even this gift becomes another source of trauma. Other children mock his guitar playing, calling it hillbilly music and saying he's putting on airs. Elvis learns that his talent makes him both special and more vulnerable to attack. The bullying intensifies as Elvis enters adolescence. He's developing into an unusually handsome young man, but his beauty makes him a target for boys who are threatened by his appearance and girls who don't know how to handle their attraction to someone so different from the typical masculine ideal. One particularly traumatic incident occurs when Elvis is 14. A group of older boys corner him after school and force him to sing for them, mocking his performance and threatening to break his guitar if he doesn't dance like a monkey. The humiliation of this experience teaches Elvis that his talent can be weaponized against him, that performing can be both empowering and degrading. This incident creates a psychological split in Elvis's relationship with his own abilities. He needs the validation that comes from performing, but he also fears the vulnerability that performance requires. This conflict will plague him throughout his career. The man who could command any stage but never felt safe showing his true self. As Elvis approaches high school, the accumulated trauma of his childhood has created a complex psychological profile. He's extraordinarily empathetic, but has difficulty trusting people. He's desperate for love, but doesn't believe he deserves it. He's incredibly talented, but convinced that his talent makes him a target. He's developed what psychologists call complex PTSD, a condition that results from chronic childhood trauma rather than a single traumatic event. The symptoms include emotional dysregulation, difficulty with relationships, problems with self-worth, and a constant sense of being different or damaged. But complex PTSD also creates some extraordinary capabilities. Trauma survivors often develop enhanced creativity, heightened emotional sensitivity, and an ability to connect with others who are suffering. These are the very qualities that will make Elvis Presley one of the most compelling performers in history. The teenage Elvis, who walks into Sun Records in 1954, is carrying all of this psychological complexity. He's not just a talented kid looking to make a record for his mother. He's a trauma survivor, using music as therapy, a young man desperate to prove he's worthy of love, a performer who needs the stage to feel alive. Sam Phillips recognizes something special in Elvis, but what he's really recognizing is the sound of a human being who has transformed pain into art. The vulnerability in Elvis's voice, the raw emotion in his performance, the way he seems to be singing directly to each listener's heart, these qualities come directly from his traumatic childhood. That's All Right isn't just a song, it's a therapy session set to music. When Elvis sings, he's processing years of grief, shame, fear, and longing. The audience responds so powerfully because they're hearing authentic emotion, the kind that only comes from real suffering. The success of that first record creates a new problem for Elvis. Fame requires him to relive his trauma publicly, night after night. Every performance is a return to his childhood feelings of vulnerability and exposure. The more famous he becomes, the more he feels like that bullied little boy being forced to perform for his tormentors. This is why Elvis develops such a complicated relationship with his own success. He needs the validation that fame provides, but he also experiences each performance as a kind of emotional self-harm. He's giving pieces of his wounded soul to strangers, hoping they'll give him the love he never received as a child. The prescription drug use that will eventually kill Elvis begins as an attempt to manage this psychological pain. The pills don't just numb physical discomfort, they numb the emotional flashbacks, the anxiety attacks, the overwhelming feelings of unworthiness that fame triggers. Elvis becomes addicted not just to drugs, but to the numbness they provide from his childhood trauma. Every pill is an attempt to silence the voices that tell him he doesn't deserve success, that he's a fraud, that everyone will eventually abandon him, like his father abandoned the family, like Jesse abandoned him through death. The patterns established in Elvis's childhood play out tragically in his adult relationships. He seeks partners who need to be rescued, recreating the dynamic he had with his mother. He's attracted to people who are damaged or vulnerable because that's the kind of love he understands. But he also expects his romantic partners to be perfect, to never disappoint him, to love him unconditionally in ways that no human being can sustain. When they inevitably fail to meet these impossible standards, Elvis feels abandoned and betrayed. Just like he felt when his father went to prison or when other children rejected him, his relationship with Priscilla follows this pattern exactly. He's attracted to her youth and vulnerability, but he also expects her to be a perfect wife, mother, and companion, while he continues to live like a man-child who never learned proper boundaries or emotional regulation. The end of his marriage to Priscilla triggers a psychological crisis that accelerates his decline. The divorce represents everything he feared as a child: abandonment, rejection, failure to be worthy of love. His drug use increases dramatically as he tries to cope with feelings that date back to his earliest trauma. In his final years, Elvis is essentially a traumatized child in a man's body, using fame and drugs to avoid confronting the psychological wounds that have been festering since birth. He's surrounded by people who depend on him financially, but who can't provide the kind of deep, unconditional love that might have healed his childhood pain. The tragedy of Elvis Presley's life isn't just that he died young, it's that he spent his entire life trying to heal wounds that were carved into his ingested psyche before he had the tools to understand or process them. His extraordinary talent was born from trauma, but trauma also killed him. This story is creative exploration based on documented psychological research and known facts about Elvis's childhood. While the specific incidents described here may be fictionalized, they represent the types of experiences that psychological literature tells us create both extraordinary artistic ability and devastating personal struggles. Modern trauma therapy recognizes that childhood experiences shape adult behavior in profound ways. The hypervigilance, people-pleasing, emotional dysregulation, and addiction patterns that characterized Elvis's adult life are all common responses to complex childhood trauma. What makes Elvis's story particularly tragic is that the very experiences that damaged him psychologically also created his genius, his empathy, his ability to connect with audiences, his raw emotional authenticity. These gifts came directly from his traumatic experiences. Understanding Elvis through the lens of trauma psychology doesn't excuse his behavior or minimize the harm he caused to others through his addiction and emotional instability, but it does help us understand how a person of such extraordinary talent could also be so profoundly self-destructive. The real lesson of Elvis's story may be about the importance of recognizing and treating childhood trauma before it shapes an entire lifetime. With proper support and therapy, Elvis might have been able to keep his artistic gifts while healing his psychological wounds. Instead, he became a cautionary tale about how untreated trauma can destroy even the most talented and beloved individuals. and how fame and success are no protection against the long-term effects of childhood pain. If this exploration of Elvis's psychological development has given you new insight into how childhood shapes adulthood, I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because next week we're examining another aspect of celebrity psychology that reveals how trauma creates both genius and tragedy. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think understanding Elvis's childhood trauma changes how you view his music and his struggles with addiction? Share this video with someone who might benefit from understanding how childhood experiences shape adult behavior, or anyone who's interested in the psychological foundations of artistic genius. Because here's the truth this story teaches us. We are all shaped by experiences we may not even remember. And healing begins with understanding how our earliest years continue to influence our lives. The music is bigger than any of us. But the pain that creates the music is something we all share, and something we can all work to heal. Thank you for joining me on this psychological journey through Elvis's childhood. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll explore another aspect of how trauma and talent intertwine in the lives of extraordinary people. Remember, understanding our past doesn't excuse our behavior, but it can help us make better choices for our future. Thanks for watching.